Hey, stop scrolling for a second. What I'm about to tell you happened at one of the most expensive engagement parties New York had ever seen. Chandeliers, diamonds, 300 guests in silk and tuxedos. And in front of every single one of them, a maid in a plain gray uniform knocked out the future Mrs. Cole with one hand. Nobody in that ballroom knew who she really was. By the end of this story, neither will you, until it's too late to look away. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from tonight and which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I love reading where you all are from. Tonight's story is one of the most emotional ones I've told in a long time. It's about pride, humiliation, and a secret so big it changes everything you think you know about the people in this house. Stay with me till the end, because the truth doesn't come out the way you'd expect. She had learned a long time ago that silence was the only armor a poor woman could afford. Elena Reyes was 34 years old, and most days she felt 60, not because her body was tired, though it was, but because her heart had carried more than most hearts are built to hold. She woke every morning at 4:30 a.m. in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, kissed her sleeping 8-year-old son Mateo on the forehead, left a note on the kitchen table that said, "Mommy loves you. Be good for Auntie Rosa," and rode the subway for 55 minutes to the Upper East Side, where she cleaned the 22-room mansion of one of the richest men in America. 3 years ago, Elena's life had looked completely different. She had been Sergeant First Class Elena Reyes, a decorated Army combat instructor, one of the first women to complete close-quarters defense training at Fort Benning and go on to teach it. She had traveled the world training soldiers half her size and twice her size how to survive when everything went wrong. She had a husband, David, a firefighter with a laugh that filled a room. She had a future. Then David died, pulling a child out of a burning building in Brooklyn. 2 months later, a training accident tore Elena's shoulder apart so badly the doctor said her career, the one thing besides her son that gave her identity, was over. The medical bills ate what little savings they had. The Army pension didn't stretch far enough for a single mother in New York City. So Elena did what strong people do when the world takes everything from them. She found the nearest door still open and walked through it, even if it was a servant's entrance of a mansion belonging to a man she'd never met. That man was Daniel Cole, 34 years old, self-made, the kind of wealthy that made magazine editors run out of superlatives. He'd built a real estate and technology empire from nothing after his own father lost everything in the 2008 crash. Daniel wasn't cruel. He was simply absent, the way rich, busy men often are, more familiar with boardrooms in his own kitchen, more aware of stock prices than the woman who ironed his shirts every Tuesday. And then there was Vanessa Hart, 30 years old, stunning, magazine cover beautiful, the daughter of a hedge fund family that had quietly run out of money 2 generations ago, but never stopped acting like they hadn't. Vanessa had spent 6 years perfecting one skill above all others, making herself irreplaceable to powerful men. She had met Daniel at a charity gala 18 months earlier, and within a year, there was a ring on her finger worth more than Elena would earn in a decade. From the very first week Elena started working in that house, she understood something the other staff already knew and never said out loud. Miss Hart was not kind to the people who couldn't fight back. "You missed a spot," Vanessa said on Elena's 3rd day, pointing to a windowsill that was, in fact, spotless. "Do it again. I don't pay you to be lazy." Elena wanted to say, "You don't pay me at all. Mr. Cole does," but she swallowed it the way she'd learned to swallow so many things since David died. She needed this job. Mateo needed shoes for school. Rosa, her sister, couldn't watch him forever for free. Weeks passed. Vanessa's small cruelties became a daily ritual. A coffee accidentally spilled on a freshly mopped floor, so Elena would have to redo it. A designer scarf misplaced, so Elena would be blamed and forced to search for hours. Comment about Elena's accent, her shoes, her tired eyes. Elena absorbed every single one of them with the same quiet discipline she once used to absorb a 40-mile ruck march. She thought of Mateo's face. She thought of the rent. She said nothing. But something in her chest was tightening, day by day, like a coiled spring being wound tighter than it was ever meant to hold. One evening, as Elena was leaving to the kitchen, she passed the study where Daniel was on a call, his tie loosened, his eyes exhausted in a way that made him look, for just a moment, almost human. He glanced up and saw her. "Long day?" he asked, surprising her. It was the first real sentence he'd spoken to her in 3 months. "Every day is long, Mr. Cole," Elena said simply, and kept walking because she had a train to catch and a son waiting. Daniel watched her go, something flickering behind his eyes that he couldn't quite name. He didn't know yet that the tired woman mopping his floors had once taught elite soldiers how to break a grown man's grip in under 2 seconds. He didn't know her husband had died a hero. He didn't know that beneath that gray uniform was a woman who had survived things that would break most people in that mansion in half. He would find out soon enough. They all would, because in 11 days, at his own engagement party, everything Elena Reyes had been swallowing for 3 years was going to come pouring out, in front of 300 of New York's wealthiest guests, live cameras rolling for society press. And nothing in that house would ever be the same again. Everyone in the mansion could feel the party coming like weather. For 11 days, the house transformed. Florists arrived with truckloads of white peonies. A 12-piece orchestra rehearsed in the ballroom. A woman flew in from Paris just to fit Vanessa's engagement gown by hand. And through all of it, the staff, 12 people in total, worked 18-hour days to make sure Vanessa Hart's moment was perfect. Elena worked harder than anyone. She scrubbed marble until her knuckles bled through her gloves. She pressed 300 napkins by hand because Vanessa didn't trust the laundering service. She stayed 2 hours past her shift, missing bedtime with Mateo 4 nights that week, watching her son grow tired of asking, "Will you be home tonight, Mommy?" Over video calls that always ended with her whispering, "I love you, baby." Close your eyes from a mansion hallway that wasn't her home. Vanessa's cruelty sharpened as the party approached. The way people under pressure often reveal exactly who they are. She fired the head chef 2 days before the event over a soup that was, according to 3 other guests who tasted it, perfect. She screamed at a florist until the young woman cried in the garden. She told Elena, in front of the other staff, that if a single thing went wrong at her party, people like you are the reason people like me can't have nice things. Elena said nothing. She thought of the rent due on the 1st. She thought of Mateo's growing feet, needing new shoes. She thought of David, and what he would say. "Hold the line, Mija. Hold the line." Words he used to say to young firefighters before he went in after them himself, one last time. Daniel, meanwhile, was drowning in his own world. A merger was closing the same week as his engagement party, and he spent those 11 days in back-to-back calls, barely present in his own home, trusting Vanessa completely to handle the details. He had no idea what those details cost the people serving him. 2 nights before the party, Daniel found Elena in the hallway near midnight, still working. She was straightening framed photographs. His late mother, a woman Daniel had lost to cancer when he was 26, right before his empire began. "You don't have to still be here," Daniel said. "Miss Hart wanted everything perfect," Elena replied. Not looking up, Daniel studied her for a long moment. There was something in the way she stood, spine straight, shoulders set, feet planted a certain deliberate width apart, that struck him as oddly familiar, though he couldn't place why. "What did you do before this?" he asked. "Before working here." Elena hesitated. In 3 years, no one in that house had asked her that question. "I served," she said quietly. 14 years. My husband was a firefighter. He died saving a child in a fire in Brooklyn. I got hurt not long after. Doctors said I couldn't do the job anymore. So now I do this. She gestured at the frame in her hands. It pays the bills. It puts my son through school. Something shifted in Daniel's chest. A kind of quiet shame he wasn't used to feeling. He had walked past this woman 100 times without truly seeing her. "I'm sorry," he said, "for your husband and for not asking sooner." "You don't have to be sorry, Mr. Cole," Elena said, "You just have to be careful who you decide to marry." She didn't mean it as a warning, but 2 nights later, it would echo in his mind like a prophecy. The morning of the party, the mansion buzzed with frantic, electric energy. Reporters from 3 society magazines were confirmed. A local news crew was covering the arrival for a segment on New York's most anticipated wedding of the year. Vanessa had not slept, running on champagne and adrenaline, snapping orders at every member staff who crossed her path. By 6 p.m., 300 guests filled the Cole Mansion's grand ballroom. Old money, new money, celebrities, senators, camera flashes bouncing off crystal chandeliers. Vanessa descended the staircase in a gown that cost more than Elena's entire apartment building, and for one shining moment, she looked like exactly what she'd always wanted to be seen as: untouchable. Elena stood near the back wall in her gray uniform, carrying a tray of champagne glasses, invisible the way household staff are trained to be at these events. She had one job tonight: serve drinks, stay silent, get through it, go home to Mateo. She had no idea that in less than 2 hours, everyone in that room would know her name. The champagne toast had just finished when it happened. Elena was moving the crowd with a fresh tray, weaving carefully between designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, when Vanessa turned sharply to greet a hedge fund heir she desperately wanted to impress, and collided directly into Elena's tray. 2 glasses of champagne splashed across the hem of Vanessa's gown. The ballroom didn't go silent immediately. It took a second, a beat where people registered what happened, cameras already half raised from documenting the party. And in that second, Vanessa's face transformed from radiant bride-to-be into something much older and much uglier. "You clumsy useless." Vanessa's voice cracked to the music like a whip. Before Elena could even apologize, before she could set the tray down, Vanessa's open hand cracked across Elena's face. The slap echoed off the marble floor and 20-foot ceilings. Conversation stopped. The 12-piece orchestra faltered into silence. 300 of New York's most powerful people turned to stare, phones instinctively rising, a news camera already catching it live. Elena's head snapped to the side. Champagne glasses shattered at her feet. For one long moment, she stood perfectly still, her cheek burning red. 3 years of swallowed insults and 11 days of exhaustion, and 3 years of grief all rising in her chest at once like a wave that had finally broken the seawall. "You don't get to touch me," Elena said. Her voice was low, steady, not the voice of a maid, the voice of a soldier. Vanessa, drunk on champagne and rage in the eyes of 300 guests, raised her hand again, and this time she swung with everything she had, aiming for Elena's other cheek in front of God and cameras and everyone. She never landed it. Elena's hand shot up and caught Vanessa's wrist midair, with a speed that made several guests gasp audibly. What happened next took less than 2 seconds, a blur of motion that 14 years of military training had carved so deep into muscle memory that grief and exhaustion and heartbreak couldn't slow it down. A pivot of the hip, a redirect of momentum, a single, controlled strike that was more about ending the threat than causing harm. Vanessa's heart crumpled to the marble floor, unconscious, in front of 300 guests and a live news camera, her $300,000 engagement gown pooling around her like spilled milk. For a moment, no one in the ballroom moved. Then chaos erupted. Screams, gasps, someone yelling for a doctor, phones raised higher, capturing every second. Daniel pushed through the crowd, his face pale with shock, and dropped to his knees beside Vanessa, checking her pulse with shaking hands. "She's breathing," someone called. "She's just out cold." Daniel's eyes lifted from his unconscious fiancée to the maid standing 3 feet away, chest heaving, hands still trembling with adrenaline, tears finally breaking free down her cheeks. Not from fear, but from 3 years of silence that had just shattered as loudly as the champagne glasses at her feet. "Elena," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What did you—" "She hit me first," Elena said, and her voice cracked for the first time all night. "She's hit me before, Mr. Cole. just never in front of anyone who mattered enough to see it. Security guards moved toward her. A guest shouted for someone to call the police. Someone else was already uploading the video to social media, the caption practically writing itself. Billionaire's Maid knocks out his fiancée at their own engagement party. Daniel raised a hand, stopping the security guards where they stood. "Nobody touches her," he said, his voice suddenly hard as steel, the same voice that had closed billion-dollar deals. Nobody. Because in that frozen moment, kneeling beside the unconscious woman he was supposed to marry, staring up at the trembling woman who'd cleaned his floors for 3 years without a single complaint, Daniel Cole understood, with a sickening, dawning horror, that he had no idea who either woman in that room actually was. And the video was already going viral. By midnight, the Maid slap was a top trending topic in the country. The clip, 11 seconds long, filmed from 4 different angles by 4 different guests, had been viewed 9 million times before sunrise. News outlets that had been covering New York's most anticipated wedding were now running headlines like "Billionaire's Fiancée knocked out by household staff." And who was the mystery maid behind the viral slap? Paramedics had taken Vanessa to Lenox Hill for observation. A mild concussion, nothing life-threatening. Though her pride had suffered a wound no hospital could treat. Daniel had ridden with her in the ambulance out of obligation more than instinct. Sitting in tense silence while Vanessa, half-conscious and humiliated, muttered promises of lawsuits and demands that that woman be arrested, fired, and made to disappear. Elena, meanwhile, sat alone in the mansion staff break room at 1 a.m., ice pressed to her still red cheek, waiting for the police officer who'd been called to the scene to finish taking statements from the guests. She had already called Rosa twice, whispering apologies, promising she explained everything. Praying Mateo hadn't seen the video, though by morning she knew half the country would have. What she didn't expect was Daniel Cole walking back into that mansion at 2 a.m., still in his tuxedo, tie long gone, exhaustion etched into every line of his face, holding not handcuffs or a termination letter, but his own phone. "I pulled the household security footage," he said quietly, sitting across from her. "All of it, going back 8 months. Elena said nothing, bracing herself. "There are 11 incidents. Elena, 11 times Vanessa hit, shoved, or threw something at a member of my staff. You're in 6 of them." His voice was hollow. "You never said a word. Not to me. Not to anyone. Who would I have told, Mr. Cole?" Elena asked, and there was no bitterness in it, only exhaustion. You were never here. HR? Miss Hart was about to become the lady of this house. I have a son. I couldn't risk my job on the word of a maid against your fiancé. Daniel absorbed that in silence, the weight of it settling over him like something physical. He thought of every time he'd walked past his own staff without truly seeing them, every complaint he'd waved off as household drama too small for his attention, every signature he'd put on Vanessa's massive wedding budget without asking a single question about how the people executing it were being treated. "Tell me what happened tonight," he said. "All of it, from the beginning." So Elena did. She told him about the spilled coffee, the missing scarf that was never really missing, the comment about her accent and her shoes, 3 years of small cruelties designed specifically to never leave a mark anyone with power would notice. And then, because the dam had already broken and there was no rebuilding it now, she told him about David, about the fire, about the army, about the shoulder injury that ended a career she'd built her whole identity around, about learning, in the space of 18 months, that she could lose absolutely everything and still have to wake up at 4:30 a.m. and go to work. Daniel listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he sat back, rubbing a hand over his face like a man trying to wake up from a very long, very comfortable dream he suddenly realized had been a lie. "You were a combat instructor," he said finally, almost himself. "You trained soldiers. And I had you scrubbing my floors for 3 years and never once asked your name beyond a payroll sheet. You paid me on time, Mr. Cole," Elena said quietly. "That's more than a lot of employers manage." "That's not the same as seeing someone," Daniel said. and for the first time since she'd met him, his voice cracked slightly. Outside, the mansion gates were already swarmed with press vans. Inside Elena's phone, 41 missed calls sat waiting, reporters who had somehow found her name, family members, even a producer from a national morning show. Her quiet, invisible life had ended in 11 seconds of viral footage, and there was no getting it back. But what Daniel said next would change everything that came after. "Tomorrow morning," he said, standing, straightening his shoulders like a man preparing for a fight, "I'm calling a press conference, and you're going to tell your story exactly the way you just told it to me." Elena barely slept that night, and when she finally did, she dreamed of David, not the fire, but an ordinary Tuesday, him laughing in their old kitchen, Mateo small enough to sit on his shoulders. She woke at dawn to 17 more missed calls and a text from Rosa. Mateo saw the video at school. Kids were saying his mom is famous. "He doesn't understand why you're crying in it. Come home when you can." That single sentence broke something in Elena more than a slap, more than a viral clip, more than the reporters camped outside the mansion gates ever could. Her son had learned about the worst moment of her adult life from classmates on a playground before he'd heard a word from her. She asked Daniel for 2 hours to go see Mateo before any press conference happened. He didn't hesitate. He sent his driver, told her to take as long as she needed, and quietly transferred a discretionary bonus into her account. For 11 days of 18-hour shifts, I never should let happen, though Elena wouldn't discover that until later. At Rosa's apartment, Elena knelt in front of her son, still in yesterday's makeup smudged from tears she hadn't had time to wash off, and told him the truth in words an 8-year-old could hold on to, that a bad person had hurt her, and her body had remembered how to protect itself, the way she'd once protected soldiers who needed her, and that there was nothing to be ashamed of in that. "Were you scared, Mommy?" Mateo asked. For 1 second, Elena admitted, and then, "I remembered your daddy. He wasn't scared of fire, so I wasn't scared of her." Mateo hugged her so tightly it hurt, and for the first time in 18 hours, Elena allowed herself to cry the way she needed to, not from humiliation, but from relief that the truth, however messy, was finally out in the open air where it could breathe. Meanwhile, at Lenox Hill Hospital, Vanessa Hart was discharged with a headache, a bruised jaw, and a fury that had curdled overnight into something far more dangerous than pride. She'd seen the same footage everyone else had, watched herself lose control, and strike a member of staff twice on camera, watched herself hit the floor like a puppet with cut strings in front of the entire New York elite. Her publicist was already fielding calls from 3 magazines pulling her from upcoming features. Her father, whose hedge fund reputation had been quietly built on borrowed money and borrowed time, called twice, his voice cold. "Fix this. Vanessa, whatever it costs." Vanessa's solution was simple and ruthless. Get ahead of the story before Elena could. By 9 a.m., her lawyer had drafted a statement calling Elena an unstable former soldier with documented psychological trauma who violently assaulted my client without provocation, conveniently omitting the 11 seconds of footage showing exactly who struck first. She had no idea that Daniel had already pulled 8 months of security footage. She had no idea that 6 other staff members, emboldened by Elena's courage, had spent the morning quietly giving statements of their own. The driver Vanessa had once thrown a shoe at for taking a wrong turn. The housekeeper she'd screamed at until the woman had a panic attack in the pantry. The florist who cried in the garden 2 days before the party. By noon, Daniel stood in the mansion's front courtyard, cameras from 6 networks trained on him, and did something no one in that world expected from a man known for saying as little as possible in public. He told the truth. 8 months ago, Daniel began, his voice steady despite the floors of microphones in front of him, a member of my household staff was struck by my fiancée for the first time. I didn't know. I want to be honest about that, because it's the most damning part of the story. Not that it happened, but that it happened 11 times before anyone with power in that house was paying enough attention to see it. The courtyard fell silent, except for camera shutters. Last night, in front of 300 guests, Vanessa Hart struck a woman named Elena Reyes twice. when Miss Reyes defended herself. She did so with restraint, training, and, frankly, more grace than most people would manage after 3 years of being treated as invisible in the house they worked 18-hour days to keep running. He paused, and something in his expression shifted. Not performance now, but genuine reckoning. What most of you don't know is that Elena Reyes spent 14 years as a decorated United States Army combat instructor. Her husband, David Reyes, died 3 years ago pulling a child from a burning building in Brooklyn. She has raised their son alone since, working full-time in my home while grieving a loss most of us can't imagine, and she never once complained to me because she was afraid that speaking up would cost her the job she needed to survive. A murmur moved through the reporters. Someone shouted a question about the assault charges Vanessa's lawyer had threatened. Daniel didn't flinch. "There will be no charges," he said, because there was no assault. There was a woman defending herself after years of abuse nobody in a position to stop it bothered to notice. My engagement to Vanessa Hart is over, effective this morning. And starting today, Elena Reyes will not be returned to my home as household staff. The reporters erupted, assuming the worst, that Daniel had fired her, that the maid who become an overnight symbol was about to be quietly punished the way powerful families so often punish the people who embarrass them. Daniel raised a hand for silence. She'll be returning as Director of Staff Safety and Well-Being for Cole Enterprises Residential Properties, a position that, as of this morning, didn't exist because it never occurred to me that it needed to. Her salary will reflect the 20 years of leadership experience she brought to this country's military before she ever set foot in my house. It was in the world of viral news cycles, an ending nobody had scripted, not tragedy, not scandal, but something rarer. A powerful man publicly admitting he'd been blind, and doing something concrete about it instead of issuing a quiet apology and moving on. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. That afternoon, as Elena sat with Mateo watching the press conference replay on Rosa's small television, her phone buzzed with a message from a name she hadn't seen in 3 years, an old commanding officer from Fort Benning, now running a private security consultancy for at-risk women and families. Elena saw the news. "Everyone here is proud of you. Also, did you know David's old captain from Ladder 118 has been trying to find you for 2 years? Something about a scholarship fund in his name that never got claimed because nobody could locate his widow. Call me." Elena stared at the message, hands trembling, as an entirely new chapter of grief and grace she hadn't seen coming quietly open in front of her. Vanessa Hart did not go quietly. Within 48 hours, her lawyer filed a civil suit against Elena for battery, seeking damages that would have bankrupted a household employee twice over, a move clearly designed less to win in court and more to punish Elena publicly for daring to defend herself in front of cameras Vanessa herself had invited. But the internet, for all its cruelty, has a long memory when it once won. The 6 other staff statements had leaked to a reporter at a national outlet by Thursday morning, alongside timestamp security footage Daniel's legal team had voluntarily released. Vanessa throwing a shoe at a driver, screaming at a housekeeper until a woman visibly shook, shoving a young florist hard enough that she stumbled into a rose bush. Each clip, stitched together into a 5-minute segment titled The Real Vanessa Hart, collected 23 million views in 4 days. Her hedge fund father's business, already quietly unstable, began hemorrhaging investors uncomfortable with the association. 2 luxury brands that had used Vanessa in campaigns quietly scrubbed her from their websites. The lawsuit, facing a public relations catastrophe far worse than any courtroom loss, was dropped within a week. Not out of mercy, Elena understood, but out of pure damage control. Still, the pressure took its toll. Reporters camped outside Rosa's apartment building until Mateo grew too anxious to walk to school alone. Strangers online called Elena a hero 1 hour and accused her of staging the whole thing for fame the next. A woman she'd never met sent a message calling her an example of everything wrong with the military-industrial complex, while 300 veterans flooded her inbox with messages of solidarity and gratitude that brought her to tears in the middle of the grocery store. Through it all, Daniel checked in daily, not as her employer now, but as something Elena didn't yet have a word for. He arranged private security for Rose's building without being asked. He connected Elena's old commanding officer with his own legal team to finally untangle the scholarship fund tied to David's name, a fund, it turned out, worth $340,000 in unclaimed firefighter memorial donations that had been waiting 3 years for someone to find David Reyes's widow. "I don't need your money, Mr. Cole," Elena told him the day the fund was finally released to her, sitting across his office desk in the same building where, 2 weeks earlier, she'd been mopping the lobby floor before her shift officially started. "It's not my money," Daniel said. "It's your husband's legacy, finally reaching the person it was always meant for. And it's Daniel. I think we're past Mr. Cole by now." Elena allowed herself the smallest smile, the first genuine one in weeks. "Daniel," she repeated, testing the shape of it. It was around this time that Daniel began noticing something about himself he hadn't expected. In board meetings, he found himself asking questions he'd never asked before, not just what's the profit margin, but how are the people executing this being treated? He instituted a company-wide staff welfare review across all 17 of Cole Enterprises' properties. He personally interviewed every household employee who'd worked under Vanessa's shadow, apologizing individually to each one. He was, slowly and imperfectly, becoming a different kind of powerful man, the kind who uses power to notice people instead of walking past them. And Vanessa Hart, watching from the sidelines of a life that was rapidly collapsing around her, understood with rising fury that the maid she'd once slapped in front of 300 guests wasn't disappearing. She was rising, and Vanessa would not let that happen without one final, desperate move. 3 weeks after the engagement party, Vanessa requested one final meeting with Daniel. Not to apologize, but to make one last attempt at the life she believed still belonged to her. She arrived at his office in a simple black dress. No cameras this time, no publicists, just Vanessa Hart stripped of the armor that had protected her for 30 years. For a moment, sitting across from him, she looked less like the woman who'd struck a member of staff twice on camera and more like a person watching everything she'd built her entire identity around crumble in real time. "You're really going to throw everything away?" Vanessa said quietly. "For Maid." "Her name is Elena," Daniel replied, his voice calm but firm. "And I'm not throwing anything away, Vanessa. I'm finally seeing what I should have seen a long time ago, including you. I made one mistake." "You made 11, Vanessa," documented, on camera. "I watched every single one before I said a word publicly." Daniel leaned forward. "I don't think you're a monster. I think you grew up in a world that taught you power means never being questioned, and staff are furniture, not people. But that doesn't make it right, and it doesn't make me responsible for fixing it by marrying you anyway." Vanessa's composure finally cracked, tears cutting to the careful makeup she'd applied for a meeting she must have known, somewhere underneath the desperation, was never going to go the way she wanted. "What happens to me now?" she asked, and for the first time, Daniel heard something almost human in the question, not manipulation, just fear. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I hope, for your sake, you use this as the moment you actually change. Not because the internet is watching, because it's the right thing to do." Vanessa left the building that afternoon and, 6 months later, would quietly enroll in a workplace conduct and de-escalation certification program. Whether from genuine remorse or ongoing damage control, no one could say for certain, and Elena, when she eventually heard about it, chose to believe it might be a little of both. People, she learned in 14 years of service, were rarely all one thing. That same evening, Daniel found himself standing outside Rose's apartment building in Queens for the first time. No driver, no entourage, just a man who'd finally understood that the people who mattered most in his life had been serving him coffee and mopping his floors while he was too busy to notice. Elena opened the door, surprised to find him there, Matteo peeking curiously from behind her legs. "I'm not here as your employer," Daniel said, suddenly nervous in a way 300 boardrooms had never made him. "I just wanted to see how you were doing. Both of you." Matteo, unbothered by billionaire nerves, looked up at Daniel with a blunt honesty only an 8-year-old possesses. "Are you the guy from the news? The one who fired the mean lady?" "I am," Daniel said, crouching slightly to Mateo's eye level. "Your mom's actually the hero of that story, though. I just finally started paying attention." Elena watched the exchange with something warm and unfamiliar loosening in her chest. Not romance. Not yet. Just a quiet, radical relief of being truly seen by someone with the power to look away and choose not to. "Would you like to come in?" she asked. Rosa made too much rice, as usual. Daniel smiled. A real one, unguarded, nothing like the careful expressions he wore in boardrooms. "I'd like that very much." 6 months passed, and the mansion on the Upper East Side looked almost the same from the outside. The same iron gates, the same manicured hedges, the same marble steps where a viral video had once been filmed. But inside, almost everything had changed. Elena now walked those halls not as staff, but as Director of Staff Safety and Well-Being for Coal Enterprises, a title she'd initially found almost embarrassing until she saw what it actually meant in practice. Mandatory conduct training for every family member and executive with household staff, a confidential reporting line staffed by former military counselors, wage increases across all 17 properties, and a scholarship fund modeled after the one that had finally reached her in David's name, for the children of service staff who wanted to pursue education beyond what their families could otherwise afford. Mateo had his first scholarship recipient visit the mansion that spring, a 16-year-old girl named Priya, daughter of a housekeeper at one of Coal Enterprises' Boston properties, who wanted to study nursing. Elena sat with her for 2 hours, going over financial aid forms at the same kitchen table where she'd once eaten quick, silent meals on 15-minute breaks, and felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt fully since before David died. Purpose, wide and steady, rebuilding itself from the wreckage of everything she'd lost. Vanessa Hart, for her part, had moved to Chicago, quietly enrolled at university under her middle name, and, according to a brief item in a gossip column Elena chose not to read too closely, had begun volunteering at a domestic workers' advocacy nonprofit, a development so unexpected that even Daniel, when he heard, simply said, "Good, I hope it's real," and meant it. As for Elena and Daniel, their relationship had grown slowly, deliberately, the way things grow when two people have both been burned by rushing toward things that look perfect on the outside. He'd learned to sit at Rosa's crowded kitchen table without needing anyone to make a fuss over him. She'd learned to let herself be helped, occasionally, without feeling like it cost her the independence she'd fought so hard to keep. Mateo had started calling him Mr. Daniel, and then, eventually, without anyone deciding it should happen, just Daniel. One evening in late autumn, Elena stood on the mansion's back terrace overlooking the garden where, months earlier, a young florist had once cried after being screamed at by a woman who no longer lived in this house. The garden looked different now, too. Elena had insisted on planting something new there, a small memorial bed of white roses for every staff member, past and present, who had ever felt invisible within these walls. "You did that," Daniel said, joining her, nodding toward the roses. "We did it," Elena corrected gently. "You just had to be willing to see it was needed." He looked at her for a long moment, the city lights glittering behind her like something out of the life she used to think was permanently closed to her. "David would be proud of you," he said quietly, "of the mother you are, the soldier you were, the person you are now." Elena's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "He'd be proud you finally figured out that the people cleaning your floors have entire lives you know nothing about," she said, a small smile tugging at her mouth. "I'm working on it," Daniel said, one rose garden at a time. A year after the slap that broke the internet, Elena Reyes stood at a podium, not in the Cole Mansion this time, but at a national conference on domestic worker protections in Washington, D.C., invited to speak about the initiative that now bore a name she'd never asked for and still found strange to hear out loud. The Reyes Standard, adopted voluntarily by 11 companies across the hospitality and household staffing industries, within 12 months of her viral moment. She looked out at a room full of housekeepers, drivers, nannies, and cooks, The invisible architecture that holds up the visible lives of the wealthy, and thought of every meal she'd eaten standing up, every insult she'd swallow for a paycheck. Every night she whispered, "I love you, baby." Close your eyes to her son through a phone screen from someone else's mansion. For 3 years, Elena told the room, her voice steady in a way it hadn't been on that ballroom floor. I believed my silence was the price of survival. I believed that being seen meant risking everything I had left. What I've learned since, what I hope every person in this room learns before it costs them what it almost cost me, is that dignity isn't something you're granted by the people who employ you. It's something you already have. The only question is whether the world around you is finally willing to see it. The applause that followed lasted nearly a minute. Somewhere in the third row, Mateo, now 9, clapped hardest of anyone, standing on his chair despite Rose's whispered attempts to get him to sit down, shouting, "That's my mom," loud enough that the whole room laughed and turned to look, and Elena, for the first time in longer than she could remember, laughed too, freely, without checking herself, without swallowing it down. Daniel watched from the back of the room, not as a billionaire or a headline or the man whose engagement had ended in front of cameras, but simply as someone who had learned, later than he should have, one of the most important lessons a person with power can learn: that the people serving your coffee, mopping your floors, and standing quietly along the edges of your life are not furniture. They are entire universes of courage, grief, love, and history, and the moment you stop truly seeing them is the moment you stop deserving whatever you've built. If there's one thing this story leaves behind, let it be this: kindness costs you nothing but cruelty, even the quiet, everyday kind that hides behind wealth and status. Always, eventually, comes due. And sometimes the person you overlook the most is carrying more strength, more history, and more grace than you will ever fully understand. If this story moved you tonight, if it reminded you that dignity is never something to apologize for, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share it with someone who needs to hear that they matter, no matter what uniform they're wearing or what room they're allowed to stand in. Thank you for staying until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.